صلوات. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Salam, dear brothers and sisters. In the modern world, and especially in schools these days, there are a lot of misconceptions, false claims, and lack of understanding of what evolution is. Many people in the Christian community outright reject Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and many people in our community, the Muslim community, debate this topic. Today, we will delve into evolution and understand how we bring it and the Quran together. This will be dissected into 4 parts. Firstly, we will understand what evolution is in a modern scientific sense. Secondly, we will understand what people in the community understand evolution to be. I've looked at Majlis from scholars like Sheikh Mehdi Hazari and Sayyid Amar Naqshwani, who have talked about evolution. We then look at case studies and proofs of these arguments and expand on what the scholars have already said. Finally, we will finish with a conclusion of everything said and how in the future we should regard our studies that focus on evolution. To start off, let us begin with a simple definition of evolution. Evolution is when, in response to changes in the environment or if a particular mutation proves to give an organism a competitive edge, the population of those organisms reacts over time and inherits adaptations that help in its survival. That wasn't really a simple definition, but to further help you understand, what I can say is evolution is when you have animals that have children, and if those children are strong, then their children will be strong. And if their children are weak, then their children will be likely to be weak. And what evolution is trying to say is that over millions of years, the strong children will survive, and there will be more strong children, but the weak children will die out before they can have children, so they will become extinct, and they will not be able to pass down their characteristics. A famous case of these adaptations in action was in the 1950s, when mosques in the UK were lightly coloured and green. However, as a result of changes in the environment, so this was the industrialization with thick black smog, it was covering the environment, and now the trees, they were now black. So biologists then noticed how these butterflies, over a few generations, became black and white in response to the changing environment. This was as a result of the green butterflies dying out because they couldn't camouflage as well as the black butterflies, and this meant that the black butterflies had a better chance of survival. So while the green butterflies died out, the darker ones survived. This is known as survival of the fittest. We can also see this with certain strains of bacteria. When some people don't finish their courses of antibiotics, a few bacterial cells are left in your body, and some of these have mutations in their genes. Genes are the instructions your parents pass down onto you that your body cell that tell them how to grow, essentially. Bacterial cells are a bit different, but this is not really that important. But all you need to know is that bacterial cells share these strands of DNA, which means that over time, a more resistant strain of bacteria can grow, and these bacteria, antibiotics have no effects against them, and this is adaptation in a very clear and a very clear form, and they're usually more harmful and harder to get rid of. This is proof that survival of the fittest does occur, and changes in the environment, including changes we humans make, will force organisms or animals to adapt to changes in the environment. This is evolution at its most basic level, and most people agree across the world that the form an organism has will not be static. A fox will not stay in the exact same form of a fox for hundreds of millions of years, and over time it will accumulate small changes, and this is something many people agree on, and something that we can see with animals that have very short lifespans because we can see it more easily. For animals that only have a lifespan of a few months, we can see over our own lifetimes how changing the environment, we can have the animal change and respond to changes in the environment. A large misconception surrounding evolution is that it has been a perfect solution for organisms and is very fast. How long it takes the species to adapt depends on a multitude of factors, many of which we don't have the time to talk about today, but let's start with a timeline so that we understand evolution on the scale of the Earth's history. According to science, the Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, and about 100 million years later, the first water was present on Earth, and this was due to asteroids crashing into Earth with ice and other chemical reactions on the Earth's surface. 400 million years later, scientists think that the first cell life close to the sea floor, which was rich in minerals, formed, and it took nearly 2 billion years later for the first cells capable of sexual reproduction to emerge. About 750 million years ago, the first plants emerged. This is a huge timeline, and this means that it wasn't just a single cell turning into a dog, then turning into a whale, and then turning into someone else over the process of hundreds of years. This is a very large timeline. If we imagine that 1 billion is 1,000 million, then we can understand the scale of what we're talking about here. It was a very slow and gradual process, and the actual history of complex life is only a small fraction of the entire history of all life on this planet. Something that I think gives a better example of this time scale is that we're working on is that the Tyrannosaurus rex, a very famous dinosaur, is closer to us by about 18 million years than to the Stegosaurus, another dinosaur. That is a huge amount of time, and it shows just how long the dinosaurs are present on Earth and how long life before humans was present. And it gives into perspective the timescale we're talking about here. Another misconception is that evolution always leads to stronger species appearing, or it is a very simple, efficient process. Scientists believe that more than 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth have gone extinct, as of now. This is primarily as a result of mass extinctions, but we have to remember that a lot of these animals just weren't able to evolve in time in response to these changes, because it is a very slow and gradual process, but also doesn't happen at the same rate for all animals, and there are a lot of factors that play when evolution happens. It is not something that can easily replicate in a lab and something that you can replicate over your lifetime, as it is a very complicated process. So now that we have understood evolution from a scientific perspective and understood that it is a very slow, gradual process on the timescale on the Earth, let us begin to say what the Islamic community has to say about evolution after I have read articles on Al-Islam and watching videos from scholars such as Sheikh Mehdi Hazari and Sayyid Ammar Naqshwani. The general consensus from what I understand is that yes, species can understand over time, but there's still some debate on the specifics of evolution. Sheikh Mehdi Hazari makes it clear that evolution is guided by God. This means that these mutations, so what a mutation is that sometimes when parents have children, those children will be slightly different. This is due to the instructions in their body, they can be slightly altered. This is a complicated science, but all you need to know is that sometimes the children of parents, they are slightly different, and this means that over time you can get stronger children and you can get weaker children in a society. And he makes it clear that this isn't a random process, this is a divine will of God. However, the result is still the same, with some animals being able to adapt to environmental changes, some animals not being able to adapt and therefore being wiped out. Sayyid Ammar Naqshwani dives deeper into this, arguing that we as Muslims believe in microevolution, which is the adaptation of species. So a species is sort of a small sect of animals. So if you have dogs, they are different species to, say, cats. So there's a small subsect of animals. And he dives deeper into this, and he says that we disagree with macroevolution, which is species becoming different species, and the evolutionary tree of other animals. From my personal opinion, microevolution over billions of years ultimately gives way to macroevolution. If you have something on a small scale, over a large amount of time, will become much larger in scale, and in biology we learn the main reason for this change in species varies, but the simplest one to understand the evolutionary tree is that if a certain species is some animals, if some stay in a certain area but others migrate to a different area, those animals, they will have to adapt to that different environment, and they will become a different species and no longer be able to be recognized as the same animal. They will have become an entirely different species. This is known as allopatric speciation. In science, we also have proof of this through fossils, which shows these migration patterns, and it shows that they show us, and we can build these evolutionary trees for our animals. When we're going to be talking about the evolutionary tree for humans, this will be slightly different, and we're going to come back to this, as of course we believe that for us, we began with Bibi Hawa and Nabi Adam alayhi salam, and this is an entirely different tree of creation, and we are separate from the other animals we see in the world today. And this is something we're going to expand upon and clarify upon later in the talk. Coming back from a slight detour, the main argument both scholars can make can be boiled down into two key points. Number one, when a species adapts, this is the will of God, and evolution is not a random process. Number two, we humans are a different organism spiritually and from an evolutionary perspective due to the soul, and cannot be classified into the same evolutionary tree as the rest of organisms on Earth. Our consciousness and intelligence demonstrate that there is a gap in evolution between us and other animals. We will come back to this and dive deeper into how humans are different to other animals to prove that we are not the same evolutionary process itself. The Quran itself at first look doesn't seem to provide many answers on evolution, as it doesn't seem to really mention evolution. However, upon closer inspection, we can infer information about evolution and about the history of the earth. When we have some ayats from the Quran, first we have the first ayat of Surah Nisa. O mankind, fear your Lord who has created you from one soul, and created from its mate and dispersed you from many men and women. Fear last, but handles were Allah, through whom you demand your mutual rights, and reverence the womb that bore you, for Allah ever watches over you. Then we have Surah Hijr, verse 29, verse 28 and 29. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَلَقٌ بَشَرًا مِّنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِّنْ حَمَاءٍ مَسْنُونٍ فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. When your Lord says to the angels, indeed I am going to create a human out of dry clay from aging mud, so when I have proportioned him and breathed into him of my spirit, then fall down in prostration towards him. Finally, Surah Al-Nur, verse 45, Allah has created every animal from water. Of them there are some that creep on their bellies, some that walk on two legs, and some that walk on four. In essence, the Quran is telling us that humans are all descendants from Nabi Adam and Bibi Hawa, who have no parents and therefore exist outside the evolutionary tree. Another interesting point to note is that the Quran states all animals were created from water. When NASA or other space agencies look for signs of life, the best indicator is water on the planet, as it allows minerals to be dissolved and allows chemical reactions to take place. Although the Quran is very specific about the origin of humans, it gives us room to speculate on where other animals evolved from. And maybe 4.5 billion years ago, when water was present on Earth, microorganisms evolved into different species under the divine will of God, and then He led them to then become the animals we know today. We humans exist outside this evolutionary tree because Nabi Adam alayhi salam and Bibi Hawa were sent to the earth, and Allah is the sole creator. In terms of understanding creation itself, how everything came about, an analogy I like to use is a domino analogy. So if you have a line of dominoes, if you want the line of dominoes to fall, you can either knock down each domino one by one, or you could knock down the first domino and then all dominoes will subsequently fall. This is how I believe creation happened, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala initiating the creation of the universe through the Big Bang. And then all these events, all this evolution, the creation of our solar system, this is all predetermined at the beginning of the universe by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He is the best of planners. This is all predetermined events, and this is all Him knocking down the lines of dominoes, and something that we can understand. It's not a random process of science. This is the divine will of God. This is my view on creation that led up to the creation of our solar system and evolution. So what I'm trying to say is that in the same way you knock down the first domino to get the last domino, Allah set up the conditions just right for the Big Bang, so that as the universe expanded, the conditions and the formation of the solar system that was predetermined by God when the Big Bang took place, so that creation of what we know the solar system and then subsequent evolution, these are predetermined events. And the mutations that happen, they are all behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine will. It is similar to a simple chemical reaction. You put things together and you get something out of it. This is my best attempt at understanding how the events played out. Therefore, although we agree on the end result of evolution, we must remember that it wasn't random, but planned from the beginning of the universe by God, similar to a chemical reaction. What may appear random to us is merely God's plan, as we are the creation and He is the creator. Now I'll move into part 3 of our discussion. As you know, and in the beginning, I put the layout into 4 parts. This is now part 3, and we will dive deeper into what the Quran was saying, into what these scholars said, and we will make our own judgments, and then I'll conclude the argument. First, we must understand why we exist on a different evolutionary tree to other animals. We must first understand how we are different to these other animals. Firstly, we will see how we are like other intelligent animals, and then we will look at the main distinguishing difference between us, which makes us so different from other animals. Because we are the only animals that have gone to space, we are the only animals that can rationalize, we are the only animals that have this level of thinking, and we will define what this level of thinking actually is. The first case study we'll look at is in 2003 from an elephant called Eleanor in Africa. Eleanor was an elephant matriarch, which means the leader of her group, and she collapsed with another matriarch, Grace, who tried helping her stand, but Eleanor collapsed again. When Eleanor died, another elephant called Maui rocked her body back and forth to see whether she was dead or if she was alive. However, the elephant was dead, and over 1 week, elephants from 5 different families visited her body. Researchers have also noticed that elephants have also been seen to carry the remains of family members, like tusks, when they travel across the plains. Like humans, elephants grieve over their loved ones when they die, and at the very least they understand what death is in their communities. Moving on to crows, another animal, not as intelligent as us, but for an animal has quite a sophisticated level of intelligence. In 2009, Dr. Christopher David and Dr. Nathan John Emery from the University of Cambridge conducted an experiment called the Aesop's Fable experiment on crows. Crows were given a transparent tube and treat floating up, which is out of their reach. The crows had the access to the power stones nearby. The crows understood that by dropping the stones into the tube, the water level would rise. This demonstrated knowledge of volume displacement and their ability to use tools to reach a goal. Ultimately, the experiment showed that crows can show problem-solving capabilities, not at the same level as humans, but say like a small child. Finally, we'll talk about orcas, some of the most intelligent marine mammals in the sea, and chimpanzees. Orcas have highly complex social groups and can communicate between their groups. The parents teach their children how to communicate. It isn't genetically inherited, which shows cultural transmission. Chimpanzees also have complex social structures with clear leaders and communication within the groups. In Senegal, researchers observed chimpanzees crafting and using wooden spears to hunt. They strip the branches of leaves and they sharpen them with their teeth. They also crumple leaves and put in their mouths to make their vocalizations louder. This is a really good example of how chimpanzees use tools and understand how to make them and how they work. By looking at these animals, we can see that they demonstrate behaviors that suggest they have some level of intelligence similar to humans. Animals, the highly intelligent animals, can solve problems. They can pass down knowledge in their social networks. They also have some degree of emotional intelligence, as we saw with elephants, and they grieve over their dead. Some animals have also been noticed to recognize themselves in mirrors, which shows that they have some level of knowledge of what they are. To sum it up, we see that animals understand death, they have some emotional intelligence, and display problem-solving skills like us. However, there is clearly a difference between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. Both Sheikh Mehdi Hazari and Sayyid Amar Naqshwani touched on this when they spoke of consciousness and rational thinking. This is, of course, the concept of religion. For all the intelligence of animals, not even one displays behaviors that would suggest that they are concerned with or even know about the hereafter. Yes, they may understand the concept of death, but they fail to understand the concept of life after death. Why? We can see that there has only been divine revelation and prophets sent down to humans because we are the only animals that can understand the divine revelation. We are the only animals that have been given the Spirit of God, as I stated earlier in Surah An-Nisa, and we are the only animals that have been that are capable of this rational thinking, and we're the only animals that will be judged on the day of judgment. It wouldn't be fair to judge wolves on the day of judgment when they have never received any form of divine revelation, any objective truths to show them what is right from wrong. It is merely a wolf, and they only act on what they perceive and what they can do in the natural world. If we were to construct a timeline for humanity, it begins with Nabi Adam. He is the first human who brings religion for humanity. This elevates them on the evolutionary scale, and if he had not come, there would have been a limit as to how far we could have evolved. If we go back to what the Quran says into the creation of man, he says in Surah Hijr, verse 29, that God breathed his spirit into the first human. This is in essence the divine gift of accessing intelligence to understand life after death. To give an even clearer demonstration of how we are different to animals in the Quran, as we know in Islam, there are two types of knowledge. There is ilm al-naqli, which is the knowledge we get from divine revelation, and there is ilm al-aqli, which is the natural reasoning us humans have. We can make the arguments that these primates we see around the world that closely resemble humans represent how far we could have gotten without the divine revelation, without the divine will of God. And we see that we evolve differently to these animals as we have a separate path to creation as these other animals. Animals, they have ilm al-aqli, they have a basic form of ilm al-aqli. They are able to understand the natural world, they can use tools, they can communicate with each other, but because they don't have the first divine revelation coming from Nabi Adam alayhi salam, they are unable to grasp higher, more complex things like religion. As we know, we're the only animals who have religion. As we see around us, even the monkeys, they do not know what religion is. And from the earliest human societies, which shows complex intelligence, the first sign of this is religion, as they can understand the concept of life after death. And this means that from an evolutionary perspective, these animals are limited as they don't have God actively passing down the divine intelligence through his spirit. There would have been a limit to how far we could have evolved without this, and this is why we can see we're the only animals, as it were, who have this level of rational thinking. We can make computers, we can go to the moon, we can understand our own biology. This you don't see with any other animal, and this is because they are not being given the divine gift of intelligence. We began a path of evolution totally different to other animals. A key distinguishing factor between us and other animals since the earliest human societies has always been religion. The ability to have religion shows a level of complexity that separates us from other animals. Something important I have to mention while I conclude is that a key difference must be made between simply having the capacity to understand divine revelation and understanding and accepting divine revelation. There are, of course, people who don't accept divine revelation or may not be aware, but they are still human, because to be human, it means you have the capacity and you have the ability to understand the divine revelation that has been passed down. You can read the Quran and you can understand what it is trying to say. As we move to the conclusion part of the talk, I'll sum up what has been said and what we can do moving forward when we study the evolution in our biology class, and then of course we'll have Masaib. We defined evolution from a modern sense, then we looked at what the Quran, a few scholars said, and then we looked deeper to understand why we humans are different animals, understanding that we can understand divine revelation, but animals cannot. If there were any takeaways from today's talk, understand that whenever we study aspects of this dunya, they are only parts of the whole. We must always bring these aspects back to the originator, God. So when you learn about evolution in school, understand its main aspects: survival of the fittest, passing down traits, and the evolutionary tree applies to animals. Although we share survival of the fittest, our evolutionary tree is separate as it begins with Nabi Adam, who has no parents, and Bibi Hawa, not through microorganisms 4.5 billion years ago. Microorganisms 4.5 billion years ago, this is a separate evolutionary tree for the rest of the animals. We started with Nabi Adam and Bibi Hawa, and this lineage most likely started in Africa, and then his descendants spread across the globe and populated. We understand evolution to be part of a divine will. In Surah Luqman, God says, "Hada khalqullah." This is the creation of God. This is not a random process, and this is instead all part of his divine will. As part of the biological processes are concerned, the passing down of genes and traits, we should have no issue with this at all, and I hope this talk gives you some confidence into going into classes on evolution and biology so that we can have a greater appreciation of how these complex mechanisms work. Salawat. Now that we've understood what evolution is, we must ask ourselves how a person like Yazid, how he could disrespect the family of the Prophet, how he could disrespect the grandchildren of the Prophet, peace be upon him. In the month of Zul-Hijj in Makkah, we remember Bibi Hajira. The month of Muharram in Karbala, we see the embodiment of the same principles. The sacrifice here is completed. Rabab, in order to save Islam, has given not one, but two of her children. Ali Asghar was so thirsty, Bibi Rabab paced up and down the Qaima. No water is to be found. The hordes of Yazid will not let water reach the thirsty children of the Ahlul Bayt. The baby Ali Asghar was killed in his father's arms, as Hormula's arrow pierced his neck. Imam Hussain alayhi salam moved forward, then he took a step back, saying, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, as he brought the baby to Rabab. With the point of his sword, Zulfiqar, he dug a tiny grave to bury his infant son. We see Rabab facing another grave. This time it was her daughter Sakina, 3 years old. The place is the Zidan Sham, and it was our fourth Imam, Imam Zain al-Abidin in chains, who had to bury his darling sister. Bibi Sakina was especially dear to her father, Imam Hussain. He called her Qirat al-Niswan, the best among the women, a title closely associated with his mother, Fatima Zahra, the Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen. She was a favorite of Hazrat Abbas, who often used to ride up the camel during the long journey from Medina to Makkah, from Makkah to Karbala, to make sure she was comfortable. Bibi Zainab was given a special reminder concerning that this beautiful niece, when Imam Hussain bade his last farewell to his sister. Alas, Bibi Sakina suffered terrible grief after Ashura. We know how she went out into the dark night looking for her father in the Sham al-Ghariban. We read how she fell off the camel on the way to Kufa, and how Imam Hussain alayhi salam mace would not move till she was found and brought back. We see how in Yazid's Durbar she was asked a number of questions. One of them was, why did you hide your face with hands? Bibi Sakina replied, my hair is not long enough. The question from the cruel Yazid was, why do you keep lifting her feet? Bibi Sakina boldly answers, do you not see we have all been tied by one rope? The children, the grandchildren of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they've been tied with ropes and they've been disrespected in this manner. My aunts and mother's arms have been tied and the same rope is around my neck. When they are bending, they are in pain. When they are standing, the rope lifts me up. The people in the Durbar started to cry. Bibi Sakina's robe was taken off. Bibi Sakina then, with Ahlul Bayt, was sent to a dark cell called Zidan-e-Sham. Bibi Sakina was very unhappy in the prison of Zidan of Damascus. This was a small place which had no roof. The hot sun would make it very uncomfortable during the day, and at night it would get very cold. Bibi Sakina missed her father, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, very much. She often asked her mother, Bibi Rabab, and her aunt, Bibi Zainab, when they will go home. When she saw birds flying to their nest in the evening, she would ask, when will we go home? She would go to the locked door and said, will this not be opened for us? On one night she was very restless. Bibi Zainab tried to comfort her and told her a story about Imam Hussain. Bibi Rabab took her in her arms, and finally, after crying for her father, Bibi Sakina went to sleep. But she woke up crying, I saw my father just now, where is he? She had just woken up to the same darkness and the sound of the chains that were around her brother, Imam Zain al-Abidin's feet. Nothing would comfort her. Bibi Sakina could not stop crying. The guards outside reported to Yazid. He saw that the young daughter of Imam Hussain was extremely restless. The head of Imam Hussain, which was kept by Yazid, was sent. When Bibi Sakina saw her father's face, she cried, oh my father, where were you? I have been calling you. This place is so dark. I can hardly see anyone. She told him how she had suffered, how she missed him. Hugging him, Bibi Sakina went very quiet. Ribab called, Sakina, wake up, my child. No reply came. The restless mother lifted her up, but found her listless. Finding that her daughter had fainted, she called Bibi Zainab.
Look at Sakina, read some dua for her, recite the Quran. Oh my son, come and look at your sister, I cannot wake her up. The Imam came closer and taking Sakina in his arms, he said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The daughter of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, she is dead. A small grave was dug in the prison and the ladies wept inconsolably as a 4-year-old daughter of Hussain was buried. Our salams to Bibi Hajra, our salams to Bibi Rabab, our salams to Sakina bint al-Hussain, also known as Ruqayya in Sham. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.